The evening of February 19th, 1994, began like any other in the emergency room of Riverside General Hospital in California. The air hummed with the familiar controlled chaos of beeping monitors, hushed conversations, and the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum floors. Paramedics rushed in a gurney carrying a woman in severe distress. Her name was Gloria Ramirez. She was just 31 years old, but she was suffering from the advanced stages of cervical cancer. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. Her heart was beating far too fast. The medical team, focused and professional, immediately went to work, unaware that this patient would soon turn their world upside down in the most bizarre and terrifying way imaginable. Gloria was confused and her speech was incoherent, classic signs of a patient in critical condition. The doctors and nurses followed their training, a well-rehearsed ballet of life-saving procedures. They administered drugs to try and stabilize her erratic heartbeat and gave her oxygen to ease her labored breaths. Nothing seemed to work. Her blood pressure continued to drop, and her body seemed to be shutting down despite their best efforts. Every person in that room was dedicated to one goal: saving Gloria Ramirez. They could not have known that in a few short minutes, they would be fighting for their own safety, fleeing from a threat they could neither see nor comprehend. The initial diagnosis was straightforward enough, given her medical history. Her cancer was known to be aggressive, and her symptoms pointed toward kidney failure, a tragic but not uncommon complication. The team prepared to defibrillate her heart, a last-ditch effort to shock it back into a normal rhythm. It was a standard procedure, one they had performed countless times before, but as they placed the paddles on her chest, the first hint that something was profoundly wrong began to surface. The ordinary rhythm of the ER was about to be shattered, replaced by a chilling medical mystery that would baffle scientists for decades. The room was filled with the tension that always accompanies a life-or-death situation. Every eye was on the monitors, every ear was listening for the sounds that would signal a change in her condition. The team was a well-oiled machine, each member playing their part with precision. Yet no amount of training could have prepared them for what was about to happen. The patient on the gurney was not just a woman dying of cancer. She was becoming something else entirely, a source of a strange and unseen poison that would soon spread through the room like a phantom menace, felling the very people who were trying to save her. As the medical team worked on Gloria, a nurse named Susan Kane noticed something unusual. A strange, oily sheen had appeared on Gloria's skin. It wasn't sweat, it was something different, something unnatural. It glistened under the bright, sterile lights of the emergency room, giving her a waxy, almost doll-like appearance. Kane mentioned it to her colleagues, who leaned in for a closer look. They had never seen anything like it. It was the first piece of a puzzle that would grow more perplexing with each passing moment. The room was tense, but now a new feeling was creeping in. Confusion. Then came the smell. A registered nurse named Sally Balderas was tasked with drawing blood from Gloria's arm. As the vial filled with dark, thick blood, Balderas caught a whiff of something strange. She described it as a fruity, garlicky odor wafting up from the patient. She passed the syringe to Maureen Welch, a respiratory therapist, who also noticed the unusual scent. It was pungent and chemical, not a smell one would ever associate with a human being, sick or otherwise. It hung in the air, a silent alarm that something was terribly wrong, not just with the patient, but with the very air they were breathing. Dr. Julie Gorsinski, a medical resident on duty, also leaned in to examine the blood. She too smelled the odd ammonia-like aroma. It was at this point that the situation escalated from strange to alarming. Dr. Gorsinski looked closer at the blood sample. Floating inside the vial were small, manila-colored particles. They looked like tiny crystals suspended in the dark liquid. No one had ever seen crystals form in a fresh blood sample before. It defied medical explanation. The team exchanged worried glances. The fruity pebbles, cereal smell, the oily skin, the crystals in the blood. It was a cascade of bizarre symptoms that had no place in any medical textbook. The scent grew stronger, permeating the small treatment bay. It was an invasive odor, one that seemed to cling to the back of the throat. The medical staff, though puzzled and increasingly uneasy, remained focused on their patient. Gloria Ramirez's condition was still their primary concern. They continued their life-saving efforts, working through the strange sensory assault. But the unseen force emanating from Gloria's body was just beginning its work. The first victim was about to fall, and the orderly world of the emergency room was on the brink of complete and utter pandemonium. The first to collapse was Susan Kane, the nurse who had initially noticed the oily sheen on Gloria's skin. She had been standing near the gurney, assisting with the procedures. Suddenly she felt a burning sensation on her face. The room started to spin, and her knees buckled. She crumpled to the floor unconscious. Her colleagues rushed to her side, their attention now split between the dying patient and their fallen co-worker. The air, thick with the chemical smell, now seemed to crackle with a new and palpable fear. What was happening? Was it a gas leak? A chemical spill? No one knew. Moments later, Julie Gorczynski, the medical resident, began to feel unwell. She had been examining the strange blood sample just minutes before. Now she felt lightheaded and nauseous. She announced that she was going to faint and stumbled out of the treatment room, collapsing at the nurse's station. The sight of a doctor falling unconscious sent a wave of panic through the ER. This was no longer an isolated incident. Something was spreading, an invisible contagion that was picking off the medical staff one by one. The fruity, garlicky smell seemed to be the epicenter of the attack. The chain reaction continued with terrifying speed. Maureen Welch, the respiratory therapist who had held the blood-filled syringe, was the next to go down. She began to shake uncontrollably, her breathing becoming as labored as the patient's. She too lost consciousness. The emergency room, a place of healing and order, was descending into a scene from a horror film. Staff members were falling ill with a mysterious ailment, seemingly just from being in proximity to Gloria Ramirez. The remaining doctors and nurses were faced with a horrifying choice: continue to treat the patient and risk their own lives, or flee to safety. The pattern was undeniable. Everyone who had been in close contact with Gloria, especially those who had handled her blood, was succumbing to the same mysterious symptoms: dizziness, nausea, fainting, and shortness of breath. The common link was the patient on the gurney. Gloria Ramirez, in her final moments of life, had become a source of toxic exposure. The staff who were still on their feet began to realize they were not just in a hospital, they were in a hot zone. The source of the contamination was not a spilled chemical or a leaking pipe. It was the woman they were trying to save. The emergency room devolved into a state of controlled panic. Alarms began to sound as more staff reported feeling sick. A voice over the hospital's intercom system ordered an immediate evacuation of the ER. All patients, except for Gloria Ramirez, were to be moved to the parking lot outside. The scene was surreal. Patients on gurneys, some still attached to IV drips, were wheeled out into the cool night air. Doctors and nurses, some looking pale and shaken, directed the evacuation, trying to maintain order amidst a growing sense of dread. The hospital, a sanctuary for the sick, had become a source of danger. Inside, a skeleton crew remained, tasked with trying to save Gloria while also protecting themselves. They donned protective gear, gowns, masks, and gloves, treating the trauma bay as if it were a hazardous waste site. But Gloria's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Despite their continued efforts, her heart finally gave out. At 8:50 p.m., less than an hour after she had arrived, Gloria Ramirez was pronounced dead. Her death, however, did not end the nightmare. It only deepened the mystery. The source of the toxic fumes was gone, but the effects lingered, as did the terrifying questions. In total, 23 of the 37 emergency room staff members present that night experienced at least one symptom. 5 were hospitalized with severe reactions. Julie Gorczynski was among the worst affected. She spent 2 weeks in the intensive care unit suffering from hepatitis, pancreatitis, and avascular necrosis, a condition where bone tissue dies due to a lack of blood supply. Her knees were so badly damaged that she would require crutches for months. the invisible assailant that had emanated from Gloria Ramirez had left a lasting physical scar on those who had tried to help her. The incident triggered a full-scale hazardous materials response. A specially trained team, clad in airtight bright yellow hazmat suits, swept through the evacuated emergency room. They searched for any known volatile chemicals, any possible source of a toxic gas leak that could explain the mass sickness. They tested the air, the equipment, and the ventilation systems. Their instruments found nothing. There were no toxic gases, no spilled chemicals, no plausible explanation for the bizarre events of the night. The emergency room was clean. The only variable, the only anomaly, had been Gloria herself. With the immediate danger seemingly over, the hospital administration and public health officials were left to grapple with the aftermath. The story of the toxic lady, as the media quickly dubbed her, spread like wildfire. It was a tale that seemed just too fantastic to be true, a medical mystery that really defied all logic. How could a human body produce fumes so toxic that they could incapacitate an entire emergency room staff? The incident at Riverside General was not just a local crisis. It became a national sensation, capturing the public's imagination with its blend of science fiction horror and real-life tragedy. The hospital was placed under intense scrutiny. Officials needed to assure the public that it was safe, but they couldn't explain what had happened. This created a climate of fear and uncertainty. Were there other toxic patients out there? Could this happen again? The staff who had fallen ill were interviewed repeatedly by investigators from various agencies, including the California Department of Health and Human Services. Their accounts were eerily consistent. The oily skin, the fruity garlicky smell, the crystals in the blood, and the sudden onset of debilitating symptoms. Yet with no physical evidence of a toxin, their story sounded almost unbelievable. The victims themselves faced a difficult recovery. Beyond the physical ailments, they dealt with psychological trauma and, in some cases, public skepticism. Some officials initially suggested that the event was a case of mass hysteria, a collective psychological response triggered by the stress of the situation and a strange odor. This theory was deeply insulting to the medical professionals who had suffered real, measurable physical harm. Dr. Gorczynski, with her severe and lasting injuries, became the most potent counter-argument to the mass hysteria theory. Her body was proof that something very real and very toxic had been present in that room. The hospital slowly returned to normal operations, but the shadow of that night lingered. The trauma bay where Gloria Ramirez died was scrubbed and sanitized, but the memory of the chaos could not be so easily cleansed. The incident became a cautionary tale, a legend whispered in the hospital hallways. It served as a stark reminder that medicine, for all its advancements, can sometimes be confronted with phenomena that lie far outside the realm of its understanding. The case of Gloria Ramirez had turned a place of science and reason into the setting for an inexplicable, chilling mystery. The official investigation into Gloria Ramirez's death and the subsequent illnesses was, honestly, one of the most unusual in California's history. Leading the charge was the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, a premier federal research facility known for its work in chemistry and forensic science. Their task, well, it was to solve a puzzle with no clear pieces. They had eyewitness accounts from the ER staff, the medical records of the victims, and the body of Gloria Ramirez herself. The challenge was to connect these elements with a plausible scientific explanation, a task that would prove to be extraordinarily difficult. The first autopsy performed on Gloria's body was conducted by a team wearing full protective suits, taking precautions as if she were radioactive. They worked in a specially sealed chamber, which really was a testament to the fear and uncertainty surrounding the case. Initial tests of her body tissues for common volatile substances, poisons, industrial chemicals, illegal drugs, all came back negative. There was no single smoking gun compound that could explain the events. The mystery only deepened. The investigators were, in a way, hunting for a ghost. a toxin that had done its damage and then vanished without a trace. They meticulously reviewed every detail of Gloria's life leading up to her death. They learned she was being treated for cervical cancer and was taking several medications, including painkillers and anti-nausea drugs. Nothing in her prescribed medical regimen seemed out of the ordinary. They looked into her home life and habits, searching for any exposure to unusual chemicals or pesticides, but they found nothing. Gloria Ramirez appeared to be a typical patient suffering from a terminal illness. There was no clue in her background that would foreshadow the bizarre chemical event she would become. The team at Livermore had to think outside the box. If no single toxin was present, perhaps a combination of substances had created the dangerous fumes. They began to explore the possibility of a chemical reaction, a perfect storm of compounds that could have occurred within Gloria's body. This line of inquiry would lead them to a complex and controversial theory, one that attempted to link Gloria's cancer, her use of a particular home remedy, and the medical procedures in the ER into a single terrifying chain of events. The puzzle was complex, and the solution would be just as intricate. The most prominent theory to emerge from the Lawrence Livermore investigation centered on a substance called dimethyl sulfoxide, or DMSO. DMSO is a powerful solvent that was once popular as a home remedy for pain relief, often sold in a gel form at hardware stores. The investigators hypothesized that Gloria, desperate to alleviate the severe pain from her cancer, might have been using DMSO on her skin. This could explain the garlicky odor that some staff reported, as DMSO is known to produce a similar smell on the breath and skin of users. It could also account for the oily sheen observed on her body. The theory proposed a specific and highly unfortunate chain of chemical reactions. It started with the DMSO. As it was absorbed into her bloodstream, her body would have metabolized it into dimethyl sulfone, or DMSO2. This compound is harmless and crystalline at room temperature, which could potentially explain the strange particles seen in her blood sample. The next step in this deadly chemical cascade would have been triggered by the paramedics and ER doctors. They administered oxygen to Gloria, a standard procedure for a patient in respiratory distress. This oxygen, the theory suggests, could have combined with the naturally occurring DMSO2 in her system. This combination of DMSO2 and administered oxygen, further catalyzed by her failing kidneys, which prevented normal waste excretion, could have created a highly unstable and toxic compound dimethyl sulfate, or DMSO4. Dimethyl sulfate is a potent chemical warfare agent. It is a colorless, oily liquid that vaporizes into a gas that is extremely poisonous. Exposure to its fumes can cause convulsions, delirium, paralysis, and death. The symptoms experienced by the ER staff, dizziness, fainting, burning sensations, were remarkably consistent with exposure to dimethyl sulfate vapor. The theory was elegant, if unproven. According to this hypothesis, the final trigger was the drawing of her blood. As the blood was drawn into the syringe, the drop in pressure and temperature could have caused the volatile dimethyl sulfate to convert from a liquid into a gas, releasing the toxic fumes that felled the medical staff. It was a perfect storm, a 1 in a billion chemical alignment that turned a dying woman into a temporary source of a chemical weapon. While this theory provided a neat step-by-step explanation, it remained just that, a theory. It was never definitively proven, as the chemical itself was gone by the time investigators could test for it. Despite the compelling nature of the DMSO theory, it did not satisfy everyone, and honestly, many questions remained unanswered. For one, there was no concrete proof that Gloria Ramirez had ever used DMSO. Her family vehemently denied it, stating they had never seen her use the substance. No container of DMSO was ever found in her home. The entire theory rested on an unproven assumption. Without this crucial first step, the entire chemical chain of events, however plausible, falls apart. The foundation of the official explanation was built on sand, leaving room for doubt and alternative speculation. The mystery was further complicated by the handling of Gloria's body after her death. A second independent autopsy was planned, but when the pathologists received the body, they made a shocking discovery. Gloria's heart was missing. Her liver, stomach, and other internal organs had also been removed. Furthermore, many of her blood and tissue samples taken during the first autopsy had vanished. The county coroner's office claimed the organs had been disposed of because they were no longer needed, and that the samples were lost. But these explanations struck many as inadequate and suspicious. This disappearance of crucial evidence fueled a host of conspiracy theories. Why would the coroner's office dispose of the organs from one of the most mysterious medical cases in modern history? Was it a simple case of bureaucratic incompetence, or was something more sinister at play? Some speculated that there was a cover-up, an attempt to hide the true cause of the toxic event, perhaps to avoid a lawsuit or to conceal a more dangerous environmental or chemical exposure that officials did not want to publicize. The missing organs and samples ensured that the DMSO theory could never be definitively confirmed or refuted. In the end, Gloria's official cause of death was listed as cardiac dysrhythmia caused by kidney failure, a direct result of her metastatic cervical cancer. The report made no mention of the toxic fumes or the bizarre events in the emergency room. It was a neat, clinical conclusion that completely sidestepped the central mystery of her case. For the official record, the toxic lady phenomenon did not exist. This official silence only served to amplify the legend, leaving the family, the affected staff, and the public with a story full of chilling details but devoid of a final, satisfying answer. Today, more than 3 decades after that chaotic night in Riverside, the case of Gloria Ramirez remains one of medicine's most enduring and chilling enigmas. It has been the subject of television shows, articles, and countless online discussions, each attempting to piece together the strange and terrifying puzzle. The story persists because it touches upon a primal fear, the idea that the human body itself can become an unpredictable and dangerous vessel, capable of producing a poison that defies scientific explanation. It is a modern ghost story, but one grounded in the sterile reality of a hospital emergency room. The Toxic Lady case serves as a humbling reminder of the limits of our scientific understanding. We live in an age of incredible medical advancement where we can map the human genome and transplant organs with routine success. Yet the events of February 19, 1994, show that there are still phenomena that can baffle our most brilliant minds. Was it a freak chemical reaction, as the Livermore scientists proposed? Was it a case of mass hysteria, as some early officials suggested? Or was it something else entirely? Something for which we do not yet have the language or the science to describe. For the family of Gloria Ramirez, the legacy is one of tragedy and frustration. Their loved one, in her final, painful moments, became a public spectacle, a medical curiosity. They lost her not only to cancer, but to a bizarre mystery that has overshadowed her life and identity. She is remembered not as a daughter, a sister, or a friend, but as the Toxic Lady, a label that reduces her humanity to a chilling headline. Their search for clear answers about her death and the bizarre circumstances surrounding it was never fulfilled, leaving them with unresolved grief and a sense of profound injustice. Ultimately, the story of Gloria Ramirez endures because it is a perfect mystery. It has just enough evidence to fuel endless speculation, but not enough to provide a definitive conclusion. The oily sheen, the garlicky smell, the fainting doctors, the missing organs, each detail is a breadcrumb leading down a path that ends in a fog of uncertainty. The case of the Toxic Lady will likely never be solved. It will remain a dark and unsettling chapter in the annals of medical history, a testament to a night when the known laws of chemistry and biology seemed to break down, leaving only fear and unanswered questions in their wake.